Order. First order of business is to recite the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
John or Steve, one of you going to take a roll of the members tonight?
Yes, I'll do roll call. Agostinelli,
Here.
Klein,
Here.
DeGood,
I am actually here.
Fudge,
Here.
McManus,
Here.
Robertson,
Here.
Racine.
Here. First item on the agenda is public comment, and we have 0 members of the public visiting us tonight, so I think we can dispense with that this evening. Next item is a review and approval of the agenda, and if anybody has any conflicts of interest, we need to hear about that now. And I think John had one item of amendment to the agenda.
That's correct. If we could
Suggest-
add under 9 other business, changes to the R2 and R3 zoning districts.
I'll make a motion, we approve the agenda as amended, adding on the item under other business.
Support. Any discussion on that? In favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next up on the agenda is a review of the minutes from our June 14th meeting. John, I think you had a name spelling you wanted to correct.
Yes, under item 1, public comment, Patricia Bauer of Summer Hill Road. Her correct spelling of her last name is B-A-U-E-R.
And I mentioned to John and Steve right before the meeting in item 7 at the bottom of page 4 and at the top of page 5, the matter of the Village of Garfield special use permit, which we're setting for public hearing for next month. The way the minutes read it was subject to the following additional information being provided by the applicant. Then it lists items 1 through 9, but as I read them, items 2 and 9 aren't really things provided by an applicant. They're things we'll probably ultimately require, but something we're gonna get from an applicant. So I would think we'd probably just eliminate those from there since they're not gonna come from the applicant. But I don't know what others think about that.
Can we eliminate them from the minutes if we approved them in the meeting, though? I mean, we're just approving the minutes. If we did it in the meeting, we might have made a mistake in the meeting, but it was changing the minutes, changed the fact that we did it in the meeting.
I'm not sure what the motion actually said. If it's, you might have a good point. So does anybody really know what the motion actually said? Did it say literally what we've got in the minutes?
If you went with, that was probably what was in our staff report, if you went with like the things that were listed in there. So I think going forward, we can kind of clarify. We're kind of looking at all of the potential things that are tied to an application, but maybe clarifying, okay, at the beginning or at the public hearing or intro, just ask what is needed. And some of those items that you cited really are more just ongoing conditions that happen at the end. So as long as they're concluded at the end, we can clarify that. But if that's what it was in the staff report, it was probably just referenced in the motion that was made.
Okay, well, if that's what we had in the motion, then I guess the minutes are accurate as they are now.
I guess that's my question.
Yep,
Yeah.
I'm fine with that.
Yeah, I mean,
Anybody else with anything on that or anything else in the draft minutes for that matter?
Make a motion, we accept the minutes as revised.
Support?
Any further discussion on that motion? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. Next on the agenda is correspondence. I don't believe I saw any. Is there any correspondence for us to be aware of?
There's no correspondence.
Next up on the agenda is reports. Molly, anything from the town board this evening?
Nothing from the town board, but back up to the correspondence. I received an email. Did anybody else receive an email about homeless people or? Okay.
Nope.
All right, good. Nothing from the town board. We had no meeting.
Okay, thank you, Molly. Planning commissioners. Bob, anything for the ZBA?
No meeting.
Okay. Chris, how about Parks and Rec?
I don't think I have anything to report. There's ongoing work being done regarding the gravity bike trails over in the Commons, as exhibited by the people that got kicked out of this room for they were having a meeting. But I think they were done. But that's something that's exciting
They
that's
were in the
going
room
on.
next door over here.
Oh, that may be
They
the
were in
case.
that.
Yeah, I saw them outside.
Yeah, they were in the room over here, so we didn't kick them out.
Oh, okay. They lied to me then. But other than that, I think, our grant applications are in, and we're waiting that out to find out later in the fall. Anything, Steve or John, you have to add?
Yeah, the grant, we initially had heard from our grants coordinator to schedule like a visit. That's been delayed for a couple of things. But we're trying to get that rescheduled. Sean and Derek already staked out where our proposed trail was to do that accessible loop. So that's staked out and ready to go whenever DNR is ready to come up and take a look at it. And then, we met with the mountain bike subcommittee. We scheduled it from 6 to 6:45, but so it would be default over by the time this meeting started.
Sure.
So, yeah.
Thanks, Chris and Steve. Joel, any news from the Joint Planning Commission?
Well, yes and no. We got our meeting coming up in July. And according to the paper, we're gonna have a new member on our board with a shakeup in the city, so, a bunch of people leaving the planning commission in the city, and one of the members that resigned is on our joint board, so I'm assuming we're gonna have a new member, so.
We meet on the 15th of July, don't we?
believe so.
So that'll be after our next meeting here, but, okay. Thanks. John or Steve, any staff report this evening?
I don't have anything, Steve.
I think the only thing to mention is on your desks, as we mentioned last time, the Hickory properties rezoning went through, so that has taken effect, and we've got an updated zoning map.
Great, thank you. Next on the agenda is unfinished business. First item is item 6A, Planning Department Report 2023-75. More work on our master plan, and this time we're going to talk about housing, economic development, and public safety.
Yeah, so this is another, actually, this is kind of looking at 3 different chapters of the master plan in terms of goals and objectives. And as we're kind of going through these different ones, what's on tap this evening are housing, economic development, and public safety. So again, these are identified to give some background. There is obviously more detailed background in our existing conditions report that's companion to the master plan. But these have kind of a real introductory paragraph, and then really some a kind of defined goal, very broad, and then some very specific objectives. And again, this will give us the basis for activities going forward in the township that may involve, for instance, like rewriting portions of our zoning ordinance or changing processes or anything that can help to advance the master plan in terms of its goals and specifically the objectives. So what I'd like to do is to kind of go through each one of these. As I mentioned, there's 3 of them, kind of just go over them and then maybe kind of get your feedback. These are basically drafts. Ultimately, these will be part of the full master plan, so you'll be able to see that at a subsequent time. And we are also, like I mentioned, when you see these, you don't see a lot of background information. There's a lot of stuff that we're putting into our existing conditions report, which I think do we have one draft yet on
We're
website?
not quite yet. We're close. I've been working on maps. So we looked at the existing conditions report a few months ago. So we're taking notes that we got from the planning commissioners, and then I was doing quality control on all the maps. So we'll have that up here in the next week or so.
So the goal is, a lot of times when you have a master plan, you'll have a lot of you'll have a lot of background information incorporated right into the document, and it can become a pretty weighted document with a lot of pages. The goal here is to keep the actual plan, which gives direction and focus on what needs to be done, as a minimal document, and then those companion or basically appendices to it will be the existing conditions report and the community engagement report as well. But we'll put some of that stuff out onto our website for the master plan, on the master plan website page soon here. Like Steve mentioned, I think there's about 19, 20 different maps that will be incorporated in that. And that will go into more detail on some of these issues and give orientation to somebody about the issues within the community. So this first part about housing is obviously one that's on a lot of people's minds. We hear a lot about it in the media, in local conversations in the community. And there's some considerations here that we've just kind of identified. We've had this kind of discussion back in April when we talked about housing and also previously. But some considerations to increase housing availability in Garfield. And I think it's important to state what we're trying to do is create choices and opportunities for people in terms of housing. Housing tends to be based on whatever your need is at a certain point in life. So sometimes you may be in life where an apartment works for you, but there may be opportunities later in your life where you want something like a home for a family and so forth. So there are different needs at different points in life. These are to try to create those greater opportunities so people have greater choices. So certainly new residential development areas is something that we need to identify. We have our future land use map. We're going to be getting into that over the next couple of months, but that's going to be identifying where do we see new areas that have infrastructure that are suitable for the construction of new housing. Starter homes, which has been an issue that the board has really wanted to highlight, and that is basically what we think of as a smaller entry-level home, ideally in a lower price range that's easier for people to access home ownership. Medium density housing, this is sometimes talked as the missing middle, which is we tend to have smaller or single-family homes, and then we have kind of apartment complexes. This is the opportunity to maybe look at different types of housing types, such as duplexes or quadplexes, townhomes and so forth, that might give people some other options. Accessory dwelling units, just recognizing that this could be an option maybe in some parts of our township, not necessarily across the board, but there could be some. Housing allowed by right. Right now, the only housing allowed by right is single-family homes and duplexes, single-family detached homes in basically our R1, R2, and R3 district. So anything that's 3 units or more requires a planning commission approval, basically through the special use permit process. So there could be some changes to that, streamlining. So for instance, maybe there could be instances where, let's say, 8-unit building could be a use by right as opposed to going through a special use permit process. These, again, are just ideas for consideration. And then incentivizing housing construction. Right now, the town board has done a lot in terms of incentivizing pilots which provide housing for citizens of low income. There may be, in the Michigan legislature just passed a lot of different tools. There may be other types of housing that could be incentivized, not necessarily low income housing, but different. When we talk maybe perhaps about starter homes. Again, not necessarily providing the solution at this point, it's just raising the awareness that, hey, this could be a conversation that we have at some point in the future. The Township Strategic Plan, which was developed a few years ago by the town board, talks about its housing goal is, quote, provide for a balance of housing choices with a variety of housing types, unquote. So we'd like to carry that forward as being the housing goal. At least that's what we're suggesting. So that way, again, ties the master plan back to the strategic plan that the board has really set forward. So on the following page there where we have the goal and then listing, basically there's 7 objectives there. First is promoting areas for new single-family homes, particularly starter homes, a smaller entry-level home in the lower price range. The second objective is expand water and sewer infrastructure and extend streets where necessary to support higher density residential development. So we're actually kind of identifying where those areas might be. Identify different additional approaches to permit attached medium housing densities such as townhomes, duplexes, and so forth. Also looking at mixed-use zoning districts. So we do some of that already through the PUD process, but there could be a way to actually devise it through our actual districts themselves. We kind of have that to a little bit right now with the planned shopping center district, which has 3 locations within the township. So it's maybe a look at seeing how those could be altered in a different manner. Increasing the opportunities for medium density housing in areas served by infrastructure. So medium density, typically, and according to like our master plan currently, low density is 1 to 3 units. So something greater than 3 units. So kind of like your 4, 5, 6 units an acre is kind of getting in more of that medium density. When we talk high density, let's see, that's the zoning map. I think our high density is more about like closer to 10 units an acre. But we're looking at areas like, for instance, Barlow Garfield, Lafreniere Hill, Spring Hill, which is kind of the southeast part of Garfield. There's some pockets in there. In northwest Garfield, kind of up by Brookside Commons, where Zimmerman and North Long Lake are. There might be some opportunities where we have some little bit medium density, not necessarily low density, but could be some lots in there that would allow for some of those smaller homes. And that's just suggesting some potential locations. That's not saying there's other ones in there. Altering the zoning standards and requirements for housing. So this gets into really kind of dimensional requirements. So there are things that we can basically just making tweaks when we look at minimum requirements for units per acre, streamlining permitting process, lot sizes, lot widths, those types of things can sometimes be tweaked. In many cases, what we found is that some of our zoning, like some of the single-family homes that we have in the township and some of the lots that they're on are really in compliance and could not be built today. Yet it's been proven that they, do work in our community. So maybe there's some ways that we can adjust our zoning to allow for some of that smaller lot, single-family home development to occur without having to go through any advanced process like a PUD or PURD process. Consider inclusion of accessory dwelling units. So at this point, we're just pointing to that. That would take more investigation, more discussion to see that, but saying that's worthwhile to pursue, at least for consideration. And then in addition to the pilots is to consider additional incentives that would offset the cost of constructing housing units. So it's not necessarily pointed strictly at housing for low-income households, but other types of housing that maybe we're not getting in the township that could potentially be incentivized. So these are just some of the objectives. Again, this is draft. This is for your feedback, thoughts. Do these make sense? Are there some changes or additions or whatever?
Thank you, John. Commissioners? Bob?
John, excuse me, are we saying that water and sewer infrastructure is required? We kind of talk around that in the very first sentence. It says this.
I think what we're looking at is when we talk about newer areas, if we're trying to really facilitate that one of the ways that we want to do is tie it to our infrastructure. It's not required to do housing.
We don't have to do infrastructure then.
Right, because for instance, when I look at kind of our northwest corner of the township, kind of getting out there towards Gray Road, we have some infrastructure a little bit. We have some water main that's going in, but we actually have a lot more land up to that area. I could see that being, developed into additional housing, but not necessarily requiring water and sewer service.
Thank you.
Other commissioners with any comments?
Under the considerations to increase housing availability, the item 3, medium-density housing, I really like that. I think that I like the references to duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, townhomes, and small apartment buildings. My interpretation, and I just want to verify that, is that the intent is that duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, and townhouses are intended medium-density housing with ownership. Like, those could be another, it's another version of a starter home. And then we're separately referencing small apartment buildings to acknowledge that medium-density housing can also be apartment buildings. I feel like that gives us latitude, and I know that I brought this up earlier, and there's, you guys expressed, John and Steve, I think you guys both expressed some, which I'm conscientious of, that we specify type, not necessarily ownership, but I'd still like to continue to press on creative ways to incorporate medium-density ownership, as opposed to, so we have other options than just the single family on a single lot. So I feel like that's what it means to me, and I'm bringing it up because I'm looking to make sure that's what it means to everybody else.
Okay.
And just to clarify, when we talk about that, we're not talking, again, a couple points. One, we're not talking across the board throughout every area in the township. It'll be in specified areas. Typically, when you increase density, you're gonna need things like water and sewer, because you're needing that for that type of density. The other aspect is when we talk about how would we work that, how would we permit that, how would we facilitate that type of development, is probably looking in our R2 and R3 district. The R1 we see is kind of the low-density, single-family district. We're not going to touch that. It would be really, the R2 is definitely underutilized. The R3 is applied. It's typically in areas where it has larger parcels is being developed with larger apartment complexes. But their R3 can also work for smaller lots too, like 1 acre or even less. But it's something where we can make some tweaks to that and apply that in particular areas within the township, again, that have services and so forth, and are ideal for those types of housing.
Great.
Like the example was kind of Aspen Pines being that's like 8 unit, that was being approved, I think, just shortly before I started, because I was not part of that approval process. But yeah, there's like, it's 8 units on, I don't even know how big that site is, but that can't be more than like an acre or so.
Yeah, it's less than it's about 0.7 acres.
0.7 acres, yeah.
So how do you replicate something like that? And that's where I'll actually cover a little bit of this later on under other business of what were some of the challenges that we're running into, the ability to replicate that in other locations.
Chris, I'm not sure of the mechanics of how we would try to tie these different densities into the same concept as ownership. I mean, single-family homes don't have to be owner-occupied. We don't have short-term rentals in our township, but somebody could own a home, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they're the person that's the occupant in it. So are you thinking somehow we would have an ability to require that if somebody is permitted to have a duplex or a triplex or whatever, that one of the units is going to be occupied by the owner?
No, I guess my thought is I'd like to see fewer. We have plenty of owned multifamily rental, right? I'd like to see multifamily, and by that I mean, versus multifamily where there's individual owners. And I don't have a problem if there's an individual owner who rents their unit out long-term. I just like the idea of the opportunity for, because many people might, as a young person, move in to buy something, and then I got plenty of friends who bought a condo, got married, and then for years they rented the condo out. and then sold it eventually. So it was a income opportunity, but there was a long-term single-family occupation of it. I just feel like, I don't know the answer to that question. I feel like the master plan, as I interpret it, provides for the opportunity for us to move into the zoning ordinance writing that kind of seeks to fulfill those goals. I don't know what the answers are. Maybe it's not even legitimately in any way possible for us to, write zoning so that it has a preference for ownership for multifamily. But at least my interpretation is that there's that opportunity there, and I think that's important.
What if you increase density a little bit, if they were to create a property that was gonna be sold per unit? But I don't know, that would be kind of sticky too, but you'd have to give them a bonus for a developer to do it that way. But I could see your point, and I think it's important that the young people would own an apartment versus just renting it, and they would gain equity.
And there's certainly, my first place I rented because we didn't know how soon we were going to move, and I didn't want to be stuck with a mortgage in a down market, Of course, that never really happened. I probably should have bought, but bygones.
Mm-hmm.
Well, a goal for us has been to have that single-family ownership, even if it's a duplex or whatever it is, but to own a property. There are other ways that can be incentivizing, but not long-term. How do you, maybe the township creates a housing authority and we've got lots of money in there, and you give you a little bit of money to get started and you own that house. But 6 months down the road, you can sell it to somebody that's not like that, or it'll change. Eventually, it'll change. So I don't know how you do that either. I like the idea, and we can put it in our goals, that's what we want. We want to have people have the opportunity to own a house. Maybe that's very 50s of us, but
I think if our zoning allows, there's got to be a certain type of housing. There's a tipping point at some point where it wouldn't be profitable for them to just hold on to it and rent it. It's more profitable for them to sell it. So if we can find that tipping point and approve uses that, in a sense, accomplish what we're trying to accomplish. I don't know. I'm like you. I don't know the answer to that, but duplexes or quadplexes probably aren't really a big idea for somebody to build, invest, and then rent. They want the 150, 200 unit apartment buildings. So maybe the duplex, quadplex, smaller lot sizes, things like that would be enough incentive to create the opportunity. I don't know. It's all great conversation. It's like we're all on the same page. You just don't know.
Could we add another bullet point under goals, simply called it promote home ownership? Worry about how to figure out the details on how to do that later, but that can be a goal. It sounds like everybody's got the same goal.
Yeah, I think I think you're hitting it right. The purpose of the goal is your vision, or excuse me, the master plan is your vision. You don't have to necessarily come up with the ideas of how it's actually gonna happen. For instance, promoting homeownership, then maybe at some point there's a relationship, let's say, between the township and Habitat for Humanity or something like that. And there's some project that comes about where there's, and that helps with that home ownership objective or achieving that. But I would probably, we'll look at that a little bit more, but maybe promoting and partnering for home ownership as well, because it's not, there isn't going to be any single solution to this. It's going to be a bunch of little approaches that collectively are trying to address the issue. And of course, we're responding to a market situation. We're influencers and we have some control over regulation, but there's not a lot we can do in terms of raw investment into housing. But certainly it's something, if your vision is that, it's always good to let people know that's what we want to see in Garfield Township.
We just have to come up with the idea. It's a town board's job to figure it out.
Yeah, I'll take it to him.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, Joe, you had a good point with like, what's that tipping point? And I think looking at what the zoning ordinance says right now is R1 allows single family, R2 allows single family and duplexes, and then R3 is single family and duplex by right, and then anything over 2 is a special use permit. So like if someone wanted to build a triplex, that would be a special use permit, a 3-unit structure. So it's, do we move that tipping point somewhere else to allow that by right? Do we have parameters like special conditions on what that is? Is it appropriate to do that? But yeah, it's like that's the lever of this one is zoning. There might be a bunch of different approaches within and without zoning, but that's one of them to kind of consider. So. Mhm.
Well, we can incentivize with zero lot line and all of those kinds of things too. You know, we don't have that. You know, you go out to Arizona and you got them boom, 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 and they're 10 inches or 12 inches, you know, from one house to the next house. But they are single-family homes, and they're owned that way. But that's just changing those side yard setbacks and front yards, and how much can you use of that land, and those kinds of things.
Is it going to be part of our master planning process, or would you envision it would be after the master plan, but in connection with any potential attempt to do rezoning to accomplish any of these goals, that we would have all kinds of public feedback and input? Because we've talked about some of this ourselves. We've never had anybody talking with us.
Yeah.
And sooner or later, I'm sure that conversation is going to happen, but do you have any thoughts about when?
Yeah, so, I mean, our goal is to wrap this master plan up by the beginning of next year, and then we'll segue into making zoning changes.
So the
And go-
the big discussions would be after the master
Yeah.
plan's done and when we're talking zoning,
Yeah.
okay?
I think what we're really trying to do right now is paint a vision in everybody's mind is what is it that we can all agree upon, so that when we get to that point, is to say, yes, this is something that is worthwhile pursuing. We haven't figured out how we're gonna actually accomplish it in the master plan process, but when we get into that zoning, that's when we're gonna get into the details. We're gonna open up the zoning ordinance, we're gonna look at different requirements in there, that in any tweaks that we can make to really kind of start advancing some of these objectives, and ultimately the goal.
But John, you're also going to have, and I see one of the next things notices we have is June 21st. No, there's 28th. Wait, why am I confused? Aren't you indicating that you're going to have a pop-up event that talks about housing to get input for the master plan?
Yeah, we are.
And then, okay, so that would be an opportunity for the public to engage us, John Racine.
Yeah.
And then
Saw
this
that.
master plan actually gets published in a way as well that, while they're not going to comment, individually on each component, it's still going to get a public vetting, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're looking at ways where we can still have these conversations, and we still fall back on that public process for the adoption, that we'll have to have public hearings, as well as notifying our neighboring jurisdictions and all of that. And then when we're actually going through the process of changing any standards or requirements, obviously there's that whole public process as well.
Anything else that anybody wants to talk about on the housing topic and the master plan right now? I guess you want to move along then on that?
Yeah, so the next one is going to be quite a bit shorter, and it's economic development. And part of what we're providing here is kind of, again, building off of the strategic plan that the board put together. And while there might not be a lot of things we do in terms of the planning commission and, let's say, the zoning ordinance to advance economic development, it is an important part of the community, in terms of that this is a place that does provide jobs not only for people that live in the township, but people that come into the area. There's a lot of major employers in our community, such as Sara Lee and Britton Banners and Skilled Manufacturing. Those are some of the ones that are very visible. We also have a lot of retail, Grand Traverse Mall, Myers, and so forth, that are very impactful in our community. So it's important to recognize that while the activity is there currently in our community, we want to make sure that we continue to be an area that does provide jobs and opportunities for employers to locate here. And so this is just a pretty simple, straightforward goal of promote a diverse economic base, including planning for economic vitality along with distinctive corridors and commercial vibrancy with defined development goals. That's a mouthful of planning terminology. I guess maybe that needs to be cleared up a little bit when I read it now out here in a public meeting. But I think it's recognizing how Garfield currently operates and knowing that we are susceptible to downturns in the economy, and how do we sustain what we have. We've noticed just from a land use development that a lot of our commercial development that is occurring in the township is occurring in those established commercial areas. There may be a business that closed, but that building does not stay vacant very long. Somebody else is in there filling that space. So when you actually look at the vacancy rate, at least on the commercial, I don't know this other than just what my observations, we don't have a lot of vacant commercial buildings in our commercial core area. So we're fortunate that way, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's always going to be that way if we don't recognize it and work towards ensuring that it does remain stable. Certainly our quality of life, quality of place is an important economic driver. So things like our parks and expanding trails, our community infrastructure, that's not just there for the residents, but those residents are also our workforce. So that makes it attractive for employers to know that this is a good place to locate, because they're going to have people that enjoy living here, they have a good quality of life, that's a workforce, a labor force that they can draw on for employees. Certainly the appearance of our business districts, we impact that on a regular basis when you're doing development reviews, things like providing landscaping and regulating signage, and all those things collectively impact the character of our community. And then continue to implement an attraction and retention strategy for business and economic growth. Currently, the Township Board has an agreement with Traverse Connect, which is our lead economic development organization in the area. That's one way that they help to attract business, retain the businesses that we do have in Garfield Township. So it's kind of pretty simple, straightforward right there. So.
Commissioners, any comments, questions, thoughts? Molly?
I'll make just a comment on the reuse of existing buildings, and the cost of construction right now is really high. So rather than just go in and buy something and tear it down and build something else new, I think we'll continue to see that for a bit more, at least a couple years.
So where would you suggest promoting reuse?
No, we were just talking about our commercial districts we're not expanding to new buildings in those districts. We're using the ones that are already there, and I'm just saying that it's less expensive often to repurpose something that's already there under the conditions that we're in now with cost of construction. So
when we talk with different companies, developers that are coming into our area, particularly when it's talking about commercial businesses, there are very specific areas that they want to locate.
yeah.
31 is the primary corridor they all want to be on. It's challenging because there's particularly when you have Kids Creek running through there, so we have wetlands, topography issues. There's a lot of constraints to that, but that's they're looking for specifically these areas, and it's not a lot we can do to work within that realm, other than to look at how can we better repurpose some of these sites. And I think there's still opportunity for doing more redevelopment of these sites. I mean, even when we look at Grand Traverse Mall, that, even though at times it maybe look like, might not be performing 100%, we know that the value of that location in that property is very high. And we've, in our conversations, or at least previous conversations we had with, for instance, like the mall owners, is to let them know we are open to ways that you can repurpose these properties and incorporate other types of uses and so forth, because that location is very promising for a future.
Anybody else with any comments or questions? Looks pretty straightforward.
So the last one is public safety. And this was, when we talk public safety, I think there's kind of two parts to this. One is we talk about what we think in terms of law enforcement, the Metro Fires services that are provided, ambulance service and so forth. And that's what I think when we did the 2022 Township Community Survey really rose to the top of people identified safety and security as the most satisfying aspect related to quality of life in the community. So that's something that's going well in the township, and certainly township wants to continue to support that. But we also included in here is also things, and certainly we recognize that natural hazards are another part of life here, particularly recently when we see the impact of wildfires in other locations and how it's impacting our air quality. So there's a couple of things that we've been looking at. There's the Grand Traverse County maintains a natural hazard mitigation plan, which the township works with the county to maintain that. And it identifies different natural hazards. And its top priorities in that case are addressing things like floods, thunderstorms and high winds, winter weather extremes, erosion, lightning, and so forth. So that's something that we're actively doing right now. But also we wanted to recognize how do we relate to other communities. And so we were looking at some of the information that's provided through FEMA, which they have something called the National Risk Index of Natural Hazards. And so they look at counties across the state, or excuse me, across the nation. They also look at census tracts. And Steve can kind of pull this up while we're kind of looking at it. So it's very interesting because we've kind of known this to be the case where Michigan, particularly northern Michigan and like the UP, as an area where we don't see or feel is impacted from a lot of other areas that have significant natural hazards, such as forest fires or flooding, major flooding events like large rivers, and so forth. So when we see a lot of that blue, that's basically meaning that we're in a low or relatively low area. This is looking at counties, but it actually does also look at census tracts.
There's census tracts.
Yeah. So when we zoomed into Garfield, you'll see the dark blue is the very low. And this is basically a index. They've looked at different factors that have come up with that index. So when they compile all of that, we're at a very low risk. There is that slightly lighter blue, so that's a relatively low. And so where I think there's a part of this is there's expected annual loss, things from like flooding and so forth. There's also social vulnerability, and that's where this tract really kind of comes up as being very high. So what we're thinking, social vulnerability is most likely why that census tract, which we share with Blair Township going all the way down to Garon, we're thinking that area in there has some lower incomes in some pockets, and then also age groups, which tend to be higher in age. We have some senior housing and so forth in that. So we don't know for certain, but we're kind of speculating that could contribute why that social vulnerability hit a very high score, which ultimately impacted the overall risk index to make that a lighter blue. There's also community resilience, so our capacity as a community to respond is very high. So that's thanks to our emergency services and so forth, and our ability as a, first of all, I think it helps that our disruptions are things that we can manage and we know how to manage. We deal with snowstorms, we know how to manage those. We have, those don't occur very often, but when they do, we can manage it. So when you look at our risks, we can usually manage those fairly well. So our resilience gives us a very high score, again, when we're comparing it on a national percentile. So I think it just kind of gives us some understanding of how and it's not to say that we can kind of sit back and relax, it's just saying that we're fortunately in a good location in a way to deal with some of these natural hazards, which can be very disruptive to our quality of life. So we're just recognizing that some of the information is provided in more detail in our existing conditions report. We'll have more details, including, I think we're going to pull out some of the maps on this as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that just gives you a measure to say, fortunately, we're a safe community. There are some things we should be recognizing, that we do have some vulnerable populations within our community, or some areas within our community. So recognizing that we do have to address those to, potentially even improve our resiliency to these events. So the goal is builds upon the strategic plan goal that the town board put together in terms of supporting collaborations which promote public safety, including police, fire, emergency medical services, and then we added in planning for natural hazard mitigation, which again, working with Grand Traverse County and others. So objectives: collaborate with Metro Fire and law enforcement on land use development reviews. That we have used that in the past, not necessarily recently, but in instances where if there is something that we have some concern over development, we can have our law enforcement people review it. Certainly every site plan that comes in front of the Township Planning Commission, as well as the administrative reviews, those are all reviewed by Metro Fire. They always look for access and so forth, and ensuring that meets our fire code and ensures that these are safe developments. Certainly improving our municipal water service, that's something that the town board is recognized, helps support fire protection, particularly in new developments. Participate in planning efforts to mitigate natural hazards. The township participated in the recent update of the natural hazard mitigation plan that was done by Grand Traverse County. And then provide facilities for high quality public safety services. So we have some fire stations in our township. As we grow, there may be a need to locate an additional fire station at some point. So it's to be aware, as our population grows and development grows, that we may need to create new facilities or expand some of our facilities that we already have. So pretty important goal or subject, but pretty simple in terms of some of the actions, at least from the master plan standpoint.
Commissioners, any thoughts on this? I think you're hearing silence, which I'm taking to mean agreement.
Sure.
Do you have any questions you want to pose us, or try to draw anything out, or?
This is a very data dense thing from FEMA. If you want to search FEMA National Risk Index and play around with the map, and they have explanations for what it means. It's a piece of background data, but I think to get to, as John was alluding to, it's, yeah, we have resources available to us to deal with hazards that come our way. But this is a fun thing to play around with, and as we kind of build that background, the existing conditions report, as we put stuff forth, just something we wanted to include as well.
All right, thanks, guys. Guess we can move along to the next item on our agenda then. Item 6B is Planning Department Report 2023-76. Some more discussion on the master plan, this time talking about the community engagement, an update on maybe the first pop-up event that you're working on.
Right, so I know we talked about this over the last couple of study sessions, and what we've decided to do is pare it down really close right now, and let's do one and see how it goes. So certainly what I found as a planner, that we typically in the Planning Commission as well, that we tend to look at things, site plans, we look at maps, just like as that FEMA map site that we were looking at. You got the zoning ordinance. We are kind of a 2D visual way that we operate, but I do know when dealing with a lot of the public, they are not familiar with maps. They're not comfortable with kind of looking at things in that kind of spatial layout. So what we thought is to start is, why don't we have an event? We thought Silver Lake would make a lot of sense. We know that's a popular place for township residents as well as not visitors to the township. We thought, let's pick a date, few hours, be out there. What we'd like to do is what we found in terms of gauging the public is to do what it's called as a visual preference survey. So we basically show them images and kind of get their feedback. And this isn't going to be anything as technical as like the community survey that was done last year. This is really kind of, again, serving a couple purposes. One is to get some feedback on these development types, to have these conversations. I don't think there'll be a lot of conversations because there's only so much time and only so much ability to get that feedback. But nonetheless, it's helpful to kind of get a sense of what people are thinking. So it is a sample. It's not necessarily scientific, but it is a good sample. It also increases awareness for people about the master plan. So it lets them know that this is occurring and that they should be, if they're interested in knowing what's happening in the township, this is a good way. We thought we'd also maybe include some postcards where we'll have like the QR code and directing people to the website, which we're going to populate with more information as we go through this process. But again, just gives them some awareness that this is happening. And as well as giving an opportunity for broader feedback from the community. One thing that the community survey did was based on, it was a random sample, but those are people with, those are basically homeowners. If you were a apartment, and we talked about this at the previous meeting, if you were an apartment dweller, you necessarily did not get those because it was based on our tax roll. So this gives an opportunity potentially if there's a renter, as well as if there are visitors to our area. We recognize that we're not necessarily going to be talking all to Garfield residents, but we get a lot of visitors. We get people that come to our shops in Garfield. We got people that work here in Garfield but may live somewhere else. So it's also helpful to kind of hear from what their experiences are as well. So the thought was to do this kind of visual preference survey, and we have some images that we'd like to kind of show what we're at least initially doing. This might be a little bit more than, I think if you go to, or put the one to the, yeah, that one.
Oh, go full screen?
Yeah, do full,
okay.
and then, because I think if you flip, just use the
I
page
can
down.
do that.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
So just, again, so if you go to the first set
Yeah.
of images.
Oh, and also just
Oh,
the
yeah.
questions we're going to ask them. To pose it in two different ways. How would you feel if this was in your neighborhood? And how would you feel if this was somewhere in the township? Because you might get different answers versus, oh, I see this maybe doesn't fit the neighborhood I'm in, or I wouldn't want to live in that. But if that was somewhere else, maybe that's something we need in the community, that'd be okay. We'll see what people actually react to, but to pose it in a couple different ways at least offers that opportunity. So. Also, we can use these images as an example. There's one I had in mind as a duplex.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, but go ahead.
So first, these are just some starter homes. These are not in our area. Some of them, most of these are actually in Michigan. They're from downstate, but obviously these are smaller homes. And just, how do people feel about something that would be of this kind of density?
Mhm.
So townhomes, so the middle picture there's Premier Place over on the east side of the township. But this is a situation where these are basically condos, but they're attached. In the case of Premier Place, you got 10 units in a row with individual entryways.
And that would be owned, that's probably the best example we have in the township of like owned multifamily, there's be townhomes.
Yeah. So these are duplexes. The top one is actually just down the street from here. It's in Garfield. The one in the middle on the left is in the city, and the one, the white one with the red doors in the middle on the right is in Long Lake Township. So, sometimes we think of duplexes as ranches side by side. They can also, and we don't have an image here, but they can also be stacked. And that would actually allow for, if you wanted to go, with a higher density, if you had a smaller lot. And I'm not necessarily suggesting that we regulate that, but just to understand that sometimes we always think of them as side by side, and it doesn't necessarily have to be that way.
Mm-hmm. And the example from this would be, so this is just down the street in that, I forget the subdivision name, but right down at Veterans and South Airport. So, and there's a few duplexes in there. So as an example of like where there's mixed single family and duplexes is something that would make sense, seemingly make sense for R2, is you have a mix of single family. And if you look at a zoning map, that's all R1. Because R2 is just kind of underutilized, but it shows that somewhere we have duplexes and they're existing and working. So we have them somewhere. Boone Street could have been another example of this because there's some existing ones there. I know there's a few scattered around the, we did it during the existing land use survey, but we've got some around town.
Triplexes are something you don't see very often, but they're out there. And these are kind of an example of what they might look like. The one thing about some of these, particularly like the duplex, it does give an option for somebody potentially could build a duplex, live in one half, and rent out the other half. I think one of the challenges to these is financing. That's one of I found is one of there's a single family. It's easier to finance. Duplex might not be that bad, but when you get into triplexes and quadplexes, this is when financing can get a little bit more complicated, and that can be some of the reasons why we might not see this type of housing type as much. And this is just an example of a quadplex. A few different images. So 4 units. So then we have our apartments. The top image there is Ridge 45. The bottom image there, that's what's going to, that was an image that was presented to us as part of the Housing Commission project there in Lafreniere. So this is, your traditional apartment complex type of housing type. ADUs, which there can be different types of accessory dwelling units. There can be where people are converting interior type, whether it's attached or a basement or attic type of situation. You could also have a converted garage or a completely brand new detached ADU. It can come in a lot of different forms. This was kind of a concept we've talked about potentially we actually have this to some degree in some of our PUDs where we have different housing types. It's more when we have condos mixed in with apartments, but there is the potential to have mixed residential development where you would have single-family detached homes with maybe some townhomes and then ultimately some apartments. This would obviously be a larger scale type of concept. The image that's actually above there is in Canton Township in the Detroit area that's called Cherry Hill Village, where it does provide a lot of different housing types. You actually have some very big homes there that are single family, and then you have some smaller ones, and then there's ones that are kind of like apartment buildings. This would be something if we were to see, like, let's say the area kind of behind Sam's Club and to the west, if that were to be developed as a PUD, potentially could be a lot of single-family homes, but could afford to provide some as a transitional use, maybe up like the backside of the Sam's Club could have some townhomes or something like that. So. And this is mixed residential commercial development. So this is the idea if we were to mix in, like for instance, let's say the upper levels are residential, lower levels are either commercial or potentially even light manufacturing in some cases. This could potentially be for some infill or redevelopment of areas where we look. One area that we were thinking might have some promise is kind of the area north of South Airport by Barlow, going up around Woodmere area. We do have certainly the ability to, want to maintain some of the light manufacturing that's there or the industrial, but there are some potentially underutilized properties that could mix in some different types of uses in that area.
If you want photos to illustrate that are relatively close to us, there's several that have gone in on West Front Street. They're in the city, like the Mundo's Coffee Shop next to Ace Hardware, West Side Beverage. There's some bicycle shop in between those places that fit that bill. They've got retail down below and residential above.
Yeah, that's a great example.
I think Mundo's is short-term rental.
Yeah, stretched by the hospital.
What's that?
I think Mundo's is short-term rental.
I'm sorry?
I think the spaces above Mundo's Coffee Shop are short-term rental.
Yeah, but they don't have to be. I mean,
Sure.
as far as a picture goes.
Yeah.
Well, Pine Street, come around, you've got commercial on the bottom.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, residential on top.
And actually, quite honestly, right now, this is, in our commercial districts, this is permitted. We do allow for residential above or behind. We also have our commercial district housing development option as well. So some of this could actually happen, but it's just like, what do people really think about this type of?
If it gets done, we can take a picture of the Olson building we just approved last month.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's an example of
Yeah.
one we'll have.
Right?
One of the things when I mentioned like that area on Barlow, kind of to the west side of Barlow, kind of going up towards Woodmere, is we want to be sensitive is that the industrial land that is there right now is not a big driver of traffic. When you start incorporating commercial, particularly retail, that's when you start changing demand, and that's when you start drawing in traffic. So we have to be conscious of where where our retail goes is really important. And we're sensitive to that because we want to make sure that we're not creating congestion in areas.
I think it's going to be very helpful to us and important for us to hear the results of what you're getting at these feedback sessions. Do you have figured out how you're planning to gather the input and share with us the results or the conclusions that you're coming to after having these pop-up events?
So I think what the best thing we're going to be able to is just almost kind of, as we're discussing it with people, is to write it down in notes and notations. We've done that. This is essentially kind of the same way we operate open houses, which we've done before for like the Commons Natural Area. And in that case, we had multiple stations. In this case, we're basically going to have one station. So it is going to be limited on the number of people we can talk to, but the goal would be to write it down. We're thinking kind of maybe like on an easel or something like that, where we can just write really fast, like Post-it notes or whatever, and just start tacking that board up, and then we'll convert that all into text. We usually pick out what the frequency of difference, not just the comments, but relationships in terms of frequency of most common, results on some of those things.
Would there be time to have the people that participate do a comment in writing?
Yeah, I mean, we haven't talked about that, but we could direct them to our website as well. We could also post this. That's where I was talking about the postcards with the QR code, so they can boom, right at that moment, get onto our website, and we could probably think about it, what would be the best interface for that, but I don't know.
Right, and if they want to, expand on, or even just as a way to promote it, if they're just coming in and out to use the dog park, and it's like, I'll take a look at this and comment later, a way to just promote it. But if they have a longer comment, or just to show what we have on our website, use that as a way to track that as well. We could also just have people like sign up as well. We could do like a blast email at the end, like, thank you all for coming to this event. Here's the materials if you wanted to see any more detail, or forward them on. And we did put a notice in the newsletter. We didn't have any details in it other than please follow the master plan page on the website. So we will put, once we confirm this date, we'll put this up on the website. So hopefully people know to go look for that. We'll put it on the front page as well, so people know where to look.
I think it'd be important too for us to get feedback from you about things like the percentage of people that liked or disliked certain images that you're showing them. If you show some image and you get 10 people like it and one person doesn't like it, and then when we're having a public hearing a year from now, it's the one guy that doesn't like it that shows up and makes all the noise, it would be good for us to know that there were 10 other people that aren't here that liked it. And that's just an example, but you get my drift. I think it'd be nice to know.
Yeah, frequency
Relative
of response,
preferences.
frequency of responses or preferences is important. Absolutely.
You're gonna do this right after our July 12th meeting, but
Might have a couple more pictures if y'all finish up pictures.
yeah, a couple more topics, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll finish it up and then we'll keep commenting on it, but yeah.
So one thing, so we were looking mostly at housing types, building types and so forth, but we thought it would be good to show at least the conceptual crossing of the Boardman River, just to see what they think about it. If they haven't seen what this image looks like, it might be kind of hard for them. Maybe we might have to label this a little bit to know what they're actually looking at. But this is at least what the conceptual drawing of what that bridge is going to be in it, and just to kind of hear what their thoughts are. Again, there's no right or wrong answer. It's just kind of people's emotions and feedback to this.
Yeah, I'd say mark those roads, at least Cass, so they know.
Yeah, I think we got to put the like I can look at it and I know
Where's
exactly
our
what I'm
one?
looking
Yeah.
at.
Yeah.
So just so you know that, so this is Cass right here. This is Hartman coming down. This is the railroad track. So Keystone and Hammond coming right to here. So it'd be extending right where Hammond dead ends, and then coming up across the river, and then coming back down heading towards US 31. And what else do we got?
Bike paths?
What do they think about bike paths that are going in? We're putting in quite a few bike paths, not necessarily by the township, but a lot of developers and so forth are putting in bike paths. Township is doing some as well. What are their thoughts? As well as sidewalks. We're putting those in place and just kind of, just what their thoughts are on that. We've been getting a lot of positive comment from people as we've seen more of these pieces going in, so we just kind of want to get their thoughts on it. I think that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
If there's anything else too, like these are just some ones that we kind of put together, but if there are other ideas that we should kind of throw out there, let us know.
I think there's enough for the first go here, because this follows exactly what we've been talking about. You guys obviously tailored these ideas to what we just talked about, so. It's good to know.
Any other comments? Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this goes on the 15th, if that's the date you go, and we'll be very interested in hearing the report afterwards.
We'll send out an email just to confirm that. I think it's probably a go at this point. I just we wanted to get your feedback and thoughts on this. And like I said, our thought is, let's do this once, and lessons learned, we'll debrief and kind of figure out, not just gathering the data and presenting that, but also saying, does it make sense to do more of these? If so, where, location? We may go back to the same location. We've talked about other locations. One thing that I found in doing these types of things, if it's a little bit different than the, let's say, when we did the Commons Natural Area, where we had, over at the Historic Barns there, we had a open house, and we had people there. That's because those are people that are interested in the Commons Natural Area. They're coming there, they're want to give feedback. This is a little bit more broader in scope. It's Garfield Township. It's all 26 square mile area. What we're trying to do is go where people are gathering, so we're trying to. We probably won't, if we were to do this, let's say here in the town hall, we'd probably get like nobody. But if we go to where people are already gathered, and we thought Silver Lake's a great location, we could be by the restrooms or something, where people are going, they're going to the dog park, they're going to the playground. So it gives us an opportunity to really engage where people are already gathered. So that's kind of our thought process here, but we will evaluate it after we go through it.
Great. Thanks. Anybody else with anything else they want to say on this? If not, moving along on the agenda, the next item is new business. I don't see anything there. Next item is public comment. If the public has anything they'd like to comment about, you're invited to come forward and.
There we go.
Okay.
Thank you.
Did we cover the
Forwarded
addition
to
that
your
changes
friends.
to
That's
R2?
under 9, other
Forward to your
business.
friends. Neighbors.
Oh, that's
That's the
down
next
here.
one.
Okay, thanks.
So I guess we don't have any public comment this evening, so we'll move along to other business, and we've amended the agenda to talk, or staff wants to talk with us about R2 and R3 zoning districts.
So I know I talked about a process of master plan first, and then we get into zoning, and we start making some zoning ordinance changes. But actually, I wanted to kind of pose the idea of maybe addressing some of these a little bit sooner than later. And specifically in our R2, which is our, basically our two-family, it permits one-family homes, but it's the addition of the two-family homes, the duplexes, that the R2 is designed for. And then the R3, which is single-family, two-family, and more importantly, our multifamily district. And so as we're looking at those districts, we've had some issues with some people have come in front of us and wanted to do some developments. They wanted to build some duplexes and so forth, and they've had some problems. They might be zoned R3, which is our multifamily district, but they can't even do a duplex. They might have a single-family lot that they could build a single-family home, but they're zoned to do R3, but one of the biggest barriers we're running into is lot width. So the width of the lot, and let me use a couple of examples of some, when we look at over on Boone Street, between Barlow and Garfield. Now, Boone Street is the dividing line between the township and the city. North side of Boone Street is the city, south side is the township. I'm kind of talking about that area, kind of fronts the airport property, just down from the Sarah Auto dealership. There we have single-family dwellings on 65-foot wide lots. We also have duplexes on 75-foot wide lots. All those lots are non-conforming. It's zoned R1, but even if it were to be zoned R2, they would still be non-conforming. Another area is Linden Street, specifically Leewall Terrace, which is, Linden Street runs parallel to Barlow. It's north of South Airport Road, kind of back where Kensington is at. So on Linden Street, it's zoned R3, so multifamily all through there. We have in Leewall Terraces a lot of, they're basically single-wide mobile homes that are on single-family lots. And they're 70 feet wide. So, but in this case, duplexes are not permitted as well because of the lot width requirement. And specifically, what's a challenge in our lot width, when we look at our R2, the minimum lot width is 140 feet. It basically says there has to be 70 feet for each of the first 2 units. So at a minimum, you need 140 feet just to do a duplex. Even though we know in areas we have much narrower lots where we have duplexes. And then more recently, I had a situation, actually talking to the developer of Aspen Pines, which is on Floresta, and that was the development that was approved back in 2018. That is a 0.77 acre lot. It's zoned R3, yet they were able to do 8 family units. The reason that was able to come in, and it was done through a special use permit, is that the lot is 200 feet wide. So in there, you're able to do, you got the 140 for the first 2, and then 10 for each, 10 feet wide for each additional unit. So at 200, you can get 8 units in. That same developer is looking at a parcel on South Airport Road, kind of over by Sam's Club. It's a 0.95 acre, so slightly larger. It's currently zoned ag, but it's planned for R3 multifamily, so we support a rezoning on it. Actually, the town board rezoned a portion of property a couple doors down recently to that R3. In that case, that lot configuration right now is only 148 feet wide, so that most he could do a duplex. So even though the lot area is larger than the one where you could do 8 units, effectively this one they can only do 2 units. So we think a lot of this can be addressed based on the lot width requirement. And so what I'm just talking, why we're bringing this is, if this is we can kind of do this 2 approaches. One, we can start working on this right now a little bit. We think there can be some benefit to some of these areas where we've had interest. We've had over by Barlow interest in some people putting in duplexes, and we're like, you don't have enough lot width to do it. We're comfortable with looking at altering that, now, mainly to understand that we do have some demand for this. Also, we are comfortable in knowing that our districts have a lot of other requirements. Like, for instance, multifamily your ability is so much square feet per dwelling units. We have other setback requirements, other conditions in our ordinance that kind of manage these parcels as well. So we could kind of look at that now, or that's something that we could wait until after the master plan is completed and kind of dive into it. But I guess it's just a matter of what your comfort level is right now.
Commissioners, what are your thoughts?
What's our time? How much time do we have? We've got somebody who's, sounds like ready, willing, and able to move forward and accomplish some of our goals, if we make the changes.
So we could do it. I mean, certainly a zoning change takes, it has to go through the planning commission, public hearing at this level, and then recommendation to board, public hearing at the board level, and then adoption. I think these would not be massive changes to those. I think they would have a big impact, but they're not completely rewriting these districts. It's more or less looking at lot width and maybe some of the other dimensional requirements. It's something that I think from a time standpoint, for instance, on the example I use on South Airport Road, they're still going to have to go through the rezoning process. We could tie bar it to that process as well. So if they were to put an application, we could also look at it to see that we can maybe make those lot width changes in the R3 district at that time. So it would, probably talking like from this point, maybe 5 months before it could, maybe probably more like 6 months, because you're going to want to have a study session through it first before you even start the process.
That's if we start it now, or we wait until we get the master plan done and do it next year or the year after.
You probably would be either get it done by the end of 2023 or get it done by the end of 2024.
And I guess I would feel like it's better to service our public a little bit if we can and move it up.
Is it gonna, is it gonna save you some time if we do it now rather than wait and do it twice?
You know, I think from our standpoint, I'm comfortable with doing it now as part of another rezoning. So we're actually piggybacking those public hearings and stuff. Because a zoning ordinance map amendment is the same thing as a text amendment. So I have no problem, because we're gonna, I mean, we kind of go through this process every year. We've always made some little bit of, handful of tweaks to it, the ordinance. I will say this, I'm not saying that we have to make these changes. What I'm suggesting is that you can at least initially, let's just take a look, see what your comfort level is, see does it make sense. If you want, at that point, I think you can, I'm not asking you to restart today. We can bring something to you at your next study session and you can take a look at it and see if you're comfortable with that.
I would like
Why
that.
do you think those length of distances were set to begin with?
In the R3, I don't know. Particularly when it comes, well, and actually I think in the, is that requirement for the 70-foot, that's in the R2 as well?
This is, let's pull up.
Is C also?
C is in just R3.
Oh,
I think it's
okay.
just in R3. R2 has, it's
Okay,
still
that's right.
minimum, it's still per dwelling unit though.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, okay. I don't know. It doesn't, because to me, a duplex is a little bit bigger than a single-family home, but not a lot, And it doesn't mean that you couldn't build it smaller and look, exactly like a single-family home. But I'm not sure why. I think it's one of those things where, quite honestly, it's, duplexes sometimes are frowned upon. I think we're now getting more open about different housing types, but sometimes, and again, we're not looking at changing the R1 district or anything, that we're talking about the R2, which is specifically intended to be for two-family dwellings, as well as the R3, so I don't know for certain.
I think you guys should prepare an analysis, and it's possible that the outcome of that analysis would inform that the master plan may not support the recommended change, and we need to make sure the master plan's in alignment and then do it next year, versus maybe it will say, well, the current master plan is in alignment with the proposed change in dimensional restrictions that you're citing, and we can go ahead with it now.
Okay. No, that's a good point.
John, I like the way, what I heard. I think it follows what we're trying to do. You're only talking about R2 and R3. What's the check and balance? You mentioned a specific person that put 8 units on a 200-foot wide lot that was less than this .93. And then on this .93, he can only put 2. What's the maximum they could put on that .93? I mean, and will the change we make, what's the check and balance there,
Right. So there's a few things. One thing in our R3 district is when you do multifamily is you have to have a certain square footage per unit.
Of
So
lot
in-
size?
Of the,
Of the unit itself or
Yeah.
lots?
the lot. So for
lot,
instance,
okay.
if you want to do, it's 4,000 square feet per
Okay,
unit.
okay.
So you have to, if you want to do,
Okay, that's what I was
Yeah.
thinking.
yeah,
That-
there's that. There's also lot coverage. There are setback requirements in there as well. Then there are things that we have, in the case of multifamily, we have buffer requirements for like landscaping and stuff like that, and so forth. Because it would be still, we're not changing the process. It would still be a special use permit process,
Right,
just
and
as
you're not-
Aspen Pines
You're not
was.
looking, it's not a rezoning, you're just looking at it, I'm good with the kind of an analysis of it or a proposal, but
Yeah.
if it's something that makes sense and it ultimately helps our goal of housing, I don't want to wait another year and a half to get it done. Let's get it done.
Right. It was one of those, to the question you had, I don't know specifically how many dwelling units, but I think it was just virtue of the shape of the lot. Based on the minimum lot width, the per dwelling unit, they're severely limited. Based on the lot area, square feet per dwelling unit, they could do, I think, how was it, like on the .93, they could do almost like 9 or 10 units.
Right.
Yeah, so it was like, there was a disparity in those two numbers, and these two regulations kind of crossing each other, is essentially what was going on.
We have the other
Yeah.
checks and balances there. That's what I
Exactly,
want to
yeah.
make sure we had. So, I
Yeah.
mean, me personally, I'd say let's take a look at it.
Okay.
I'd echo that. I mean, we don't want to hold somebody hostage because we've got to work on a master plan. It may take another year or two. If there's a good idea to change something sooner and it's not inconsistent with what our master plan says, we ought to look at that. I think we've historically done just that on occasion in the past. And as you pointed out, whether it turns out this is a good idea to make these changes or not, that's not to be decided tonight. That'd be decided when we vet it. And if we do start looking at that, I think your verbal description tonight of certain places and certain things was very helpful. I personally would do way better if we also had a visual. So if you could have photos and/or drawings that show this is on the ground here, and if we think that works fine, then what's it look like if we do something somewhere else? And that would make it a lot easier for me rather than just ethereally trying to figure out what makes sense or not.
Right.
That sounds like it's just based on front foot, basically. You know, what's your front foot? If you only have a 100-foot lot, well, you know, you get one. You know, you don't get the 270s in that. So even if it's an acre and it goes back a long ways, it's just the front foot. And so maybe that's something we gotta look at.
Maybe picking up too on something that Pat's question about why it is the way it is, it might be at least food for thought for us to find out how is it in some other places, maybe other townships, but maybe also the city, which some are less dense than we are, some are more dense than we are, but it might be interesting food for thought to see how the neighbors are doing things.
Yeah, I mean, we've kind of checked that already to some extent, you know, but, you know, one of the things that, as opposed to kind of this formula of having so much lot width based on how many units, a lot of them, and in most cases, it's just kind of a flat amount, whether it's 100 feet, 75 feet, 120 feet, whatever it is, that tends to be more of the norm as opposed to kind of this, you know, ratio type of thing. So, but yeah, we've been already doing some of the research on that.
Good, thanks. Anything else under that other business you wanted to discuss with us this evening?
Nope, that's it.
Okay.
Right. I don't know if under other business, before we adjourn, just a couple of quick questions for John. We looked very briefly at the Nicollet Bank was gonna come in for the landscaping. Any movement on that?
So they, I basically forwarded them to Mike at this point for land use permit. I don't know where they kind of left up. There's been some exchange of emails. I don't know if they've applied for the land use permit yet. It's now kind of in summer, so it's a little bit past planting season. But we did inform them that they still received that letter informing them of the like. I don't know if it was the actual violation letter or just the letter of information at that point, but basically, until you actually plant this, it's not resolved. So,
Right.
yeah, they're on notice.
Yeah, I recall I remember
Yeah.
seeing one of Mike Green's emails back to Nicollet Bank on this, and they were questioning when can they plant, and Mike was basically, you know, you got this, you know, fall planting season coming up, you gotta get it in by then.
Okay, all right, I haven't seen any
We
movement.
we don't wanna
Yeah,
go,
yeah.
I mean, they have this whole year to get this done, and
Mhm.
we've been very flexible on that. So,
Mhm.
and they have a planting plan
Yep.
that's already been approved.
We
and all
saw
that.
it, it
We
looked
saw
pretty
it,
good,
yeah.
I just haven't.
Yeah.
So it's just a matter of
It's on the ground yet,
execution
so.
now, and,
Yep.
Get into those months with ours.
that's right.
Get your stuff in the ground.
Right.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, we
September,
sort of-
October, perfect time to be out there.
Yeah.
Get it done.
The other thing that this was just came up as we're talking about affordable housing and single-family homes, and they're going gangbusters on that development at, I guess, you called it the intersection of Zimmerman and Long Lake, the assisted living's going in.
Yeah. Meadow Valley.
Any talk on the single-family piece in the back of that? Because that seems like it would be an ideal piece for some single-family lots and building in there. Has there been any talk from them at all on that piece?
I have not, and I haven't asked them though, but I can ask them. just to see what they're at on that. I know when they did talk about it, they, at least from Wallach, who is the developer of that, was really looking at,
That's that piece right there.
yeah,
I mean, they put the bike trail in.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and all that. I just, as much demand as there is for single-family homes, that stuff with the
yeah,
black lines
it's
there.
already been
Yeah. So
planted out
they
there.
established the lots, yeah.
Yeah, but
yeah.
when they talked to us, if they're going to do it, it's going to be after they finish that phase
Okay,
one.
yeah.
Doesn't mean that somebody else couldn't go in there and
Okay,
build that
just-
for them.
just-
I got the feeling that it wasn't their priority until they get that phase one finished.
And I don't doubt that. I just was curious.
Yeah, yeah.
On your
else, Joe?
discussion on R1 and, or R2 and R3 on, did you also include R1 on that? Maybe we want to look at that and change that, lower that a little bit.
We kinda didn't wanna go there.
You want to go there?
Not at this time. I mean, I think it could be, but that one is, I guess from our feeling is that impacts a lot, that's kind of the traditional single-family one. It doesn't mean we wouldn't do it. I felt that one is gonna take a little bit more study.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because it's a widely applied zoning district where R2 and R3 are more succinct and more limited,
Okay.
and something we can wrap
But I
our
was just
heads
looking at,
around.
you're gonna end up with a lesser size on R2 and R3 than you are in R1 probably, and that's, I don't know if we want that, R2 and R3 to be a lesser lot size, but that's fine.
Well, it's applied in a lot more limited area. I mean, it's an area where you're kind of, when you're thinking R2 and R3, those are areas where you're kind of thinking this is multifamily essentially, or areas where we think that's high density. So its application is gonna be limited, where the R1 I could see being applied to a larger areas, a lot of areas within the township.
Anybody else got anything they want to kick around? If not, looking at the agenda, items for our next agenda, looks like a couple more public hearings, couple of findings of fact review, and do you want to fill us in on what E is, Bish's RV?
So yeah, this is, it's sort of an interesting situation that's being sent to Planning Commission. So it would normally be an administrative review. This is over at the old TCRV down at US 31 and Meadow Lane Drive. We just reviewed Pine Grove Homes there. The new U-Haul that was administrative is in that neighborhood. If we put site plan review and access review, they requested an additional access, and there is a provision in the zoning ordinance that the planning commission reviews that. Now, they have to meet certain standards, and they have to provide information that shows that they meet the standards. But that is, the way it was listed, it was put under planning commission's purview. So the zoning administrator was willing to kick that to planning commission and actually just put the whole site plan review, so it's all in one process. So it's CG. Normally this would just be Mike's review, but because of that, we just wanted to include that all together in one site plan review.
Will this be like an intro for us, or are we going to just see this one time and never again?
There is no public hearing required, I'll put it that way. So you could choose to make a decision. You could choose to table it and take a look at it again. But yeah, there is no public hearing required on this one.
Similar to when you're reviewing something in commercial highway or planned shopping center, it is scheduled for a review, it could be one meeting, or if for whatever reason, could be more.
Okay. Anybody else got anything for the good of the order? Bob, have you
Make a
got
motion,
you'd
we
like to
adjourn.
make? We're adjourned.